Hey, how's everyone doing? Over the past month, I've taken my collection apart and assembled a cube draft. I've been bringing it to my weekly local meet, and so far I've hosted three different cube drafts, all to pretty good success. The fourth one is underway. So with that said, I would like to actually share my thoughts on designing a cube and some tips to keep in mind, which could potentially be useful if you're looking to make a cube draft of your own. Now, since this is purely about the design of the cube, which means cards that you choose to include, exclude in the cube, cards that encourage, fun drafting and fun gameplay, it's going to be very dry, very theoretical. So if you don't watch this video, don't worry, I won't be offended. It really is going to be quite boring for some of you. And with that disclaimer out of the way, let's get down to it. First, let's do to get everyone on the same page. Let's do basics of the cube draft. Cube drafting is done ideally with 8 players. 320 cards in the cube for each side. The most important thing to take note of is that you play to 6 agenda points instead of 7. So games usually close out quicker, as you only need to steal 3 agendas or even 2 to win. And the other important thing is that there are 14 to 15 agendas in the agenda points, in the corp deck. Starter cards that everyone has access to are the following. One thing you immediately notice if you have drafted the official FFG drafts before is that instead of having 5 3-point agendas, you have a rebranding team and 4 other 3-point agendas. The rebranding team was a pretty good idea that we picked up from, not sure where it originated from, probably somewhere in the UK. But the idea is this: because your basic, you can run 14 or 15 agenda points, switching one 3-pointer for a 2-pointer allows you, gives the corp a small little edge, which is nice because then they won't lose on 2 agendas if a rebranding team is one of those stolen. More importantly, if you're trying to draft an agenda suite that has no 3-pointers, which most people will try to do because 3-pointers are a huge liability in draft, rebranding team allows you to complete your agenda suite much more easily. It relieves the pressure for you to have to draft a lot of 2-pointers. So it's nice to have rebranding team, and obviously the agenda text is blank. Since Spark is not in play and there's no ad blitz in the cube, rebranding team doesn't actually do anything when scored or stolen, so it's really a blank 4-2 agenda. You will also notice that most of the cards here are quite low in power level, and that is the intention of the starter set. It's to give you something to start with, but these cards should, as far as possible, not be played in your final deck because these are really, really very weak, especially the breakers. The base cube I use for my drafts are from the Birmingham cube, created by Xenasis. This, I think, is the Netrunner cube I would personally recommend the most because Xenasis does a very good job of updating it regularly with each pack release, and more importantly, I think it gives a very dynamic drafting and playing experience, and I think that's quite important. A lot of the cards in here are very well thought out, and there have been a lot of positive reviews from players who have tried his cube before. So this was my starting point for the first cube draft I hosted. In subsequent iterations, I continuously swapped cards out of both the runner and the Corpside to try to see how changing cards affects the dynamics of the draft. And so a lot of what I'm going to be presenting today comes down to my changes and how that affected the draft and what I think are certain important philosophies for draft design. Looking at Xenasis' cube, some things I noticed immediately is that firstly, the cube is very much oriented towards core Netrunner. What you know of the core set, ice and icebreakers, the interaction during runs. I think that's a very important part that is very appealing to a lot of people who pick up this game, and this is something that the draft preserves. In a climate where a lot of decks nowadays run simple gear check ice and instead focus on winning via cards like change of information, acid spam, and murder, I think it's nice to have a little safe haven where a lot of people are playing regular Netrunner, so as to speak. Good ice, good icebreakers, and yeah, just good old Netrunner. Also, it's of a much lower power level. Um, the cube tries not to include high power cards that really swing the game too much in one side's favor. Cards like Account Cipher and Temujin. And also, no silver bullets. That's another important draft philosophy. Because this is not constructed, you don't want to make players pick cards, hate cards that, cause oppressive gameplay for your opponent. If someone's running kill and they run into someone who has a plus creed, that's not very fun. And no silver bullets also encourages, basically it shifts the attention of the game more towards the gameplay experience rather than how well you drafted your deck. Both are important, but giving the runner and the corp the feeling that they can win on their own merit during the game, as opposed to I drafted the wrong deck, now I just auto lose, is actually quite important. It should also be noted that Cube is meant to be fast since it's to 6 agenda points. We do not want any cards that encourage grindy plays, such as Museum of History. Magnum Opus is a very interesting card because on the surface it doesn't seem like a grindy card, but it can lead to situations where the runner simply clicks Opus for 8 every single turn and remote camps, and the corp just can't do anything about it. That's one of the key differences, one of the key exclusions rather, of the Birmingham draft. The fact that there are no Magnum Opuses, even though it's a very vanilla cardset card. Another important thing about grindy play is that there are some cards that subtly encourage grindy play that we don't see at first. Daily Business Show was a card in the Birmingham Cube draft, but after hearing one of my players' experiences where Daily Business Show was abused to bury a lot of agendas onto the bottom of R&D, causing the game to be dragged out for a very long time, I decided to remove Daily Business Show from the cube. So these are some things that, interactions that cause big problems that go against design philosophies, so we try to remove that from the cube. Another important thing to note is that we don't want cards that are too narrow in scope. If you see a defective brain chip during your drafting phase, it's very unlikely that you actually have any active brain damage cards or sufficient mass of brain damage ice that allows you to consider using this card in the first place. So these are cards that you want to avoid as well in your cube. Finally, we should encourage card diversity. So for example, if you have, instead of running 2 ninjas in your cube, perhaps consider 1 ninja and some other sentry breaker like Mongoose. So typically you try to offer lots of diversity rather than putting 3 offs of cards. If you have breakers, you want to try to spread them out across the entire card pool instead of like just putting the best or the worst breakers in the cube. Give players options basically. 3 offs should usually only be reserved for staple cards such as basic economy cards. So here's the experience of drafting that I've collated from players and myself. Corpside drafting is generally agreed to be very fun and varied because there are so many ways you can draft. It also really depends on the hand that you're dealt, but basically there are lots of archetypes. Rush tends to be the top tier strat in a way because rushing is generally very good in this climate where the runner can get to a point where they lock out your remote. And gear checks are often good in this format because not every runner packs strong card draw or strong tutoring. Other good archetypes include Glacier and cheating big ice into the game with Bioroid efficiency research, search and oversight AIs. You have tag and bag, you have trap decks, ambushes, power shutdown, rig wrecking decks. There are lots of ways you can draft corp decks, and that feels very good. That is one of the big merits of the Birmingham Cube that I really like, and because of this, I have not actually made too many tweaks to the corp side of the cube for the most part. There are also a lot of dynamics in the cube drafting. When you see Grail Eyes, you have to consider hate drafting them even though you're not running them yourself, because if someone amasses all the Grail Eyes or all the next eyes, could be in a lot of trouble. Same thing with the Scorched Earths. Corpside cube drafting is fun. On the flip side, the Runnerside is a lot more linear basically. You draft the same thing almost 90% of the time. You get good breakers, you get good money, you get good draw, you get good tutors, and if you have deck space left, a couple of multi-access cards. That's Runner in a nutshell. Because the Corp controls the flow of the agendas, the Runner does the same thing every time. They get the icebreakers, they break through servers. It's very difficult to draft a Runner deck that does anything else. Because honestly, the Runner doesn't have that many win conditions. If you want to steal agendas, you have to get through servers. And it's not like constructed where you can dedicate a deck to milling, like play noise or DLR max. You don't have your identity with you, much less those cards in the cube. There are a couple of interesting drafting considerations, most notably the Stealth Breaker suite, which is the most powerful breaker suite in the cube, as well as the Run Base suite. If you give someone security testing, Data Sucker, and all the fix and up breakers, that runner is going to do very well. But for the most part, it's very linear to draft runners, and even with that said, the runners dominate most of the time. Collating the results, I realized that runners generally was favored, had more wins, mostly because Corps did not have Jackson Howard, unlike in Constructed. There are 2 copies of Jackson in the cube, but you don't have it as a starter card. Another big reason for runners to dominate is that Armitage is actually a very good starter card. Remember I said that starter cards are meant to be lousy? Well, Armitage is pretty good. It's almost like Opus actually, if you think about it. That doesn't hog up memory. It's a bit too good. Even with private contracts, it needs to be defended and it can be trashed. Armitage is just solid economy that can allow you to recover quickly after a run and allow you to lock out the remote with sufficient economy. Giving you 11 credits over the course of a bunch of clicks is actually quite good in draft, where the power level is pretty low. But overarchingly, the big reason why a lot of runner games were won was down to the medium. Medium is a huge problem for this cube because by just installing that one card, it creates so much pressure on the runner, on the Corp, to defend R&D such that they don't have the resources to score and win. So this was one of the big problems that I sought to mitigate from the very first iteration of the cube. Yeah, medium is just very strong. It's almost as bad as Keyhole. Keyhole is worse, it's more oppressive admittedly, because without Christian Grids and without Jackson Howard, Keyhole just completely wrecks Corpse, but medium isn't much better either, even though there's counterplay in the form of purging. Spending your entire turn to purge as the Corp is very much a losing proposition. There are lots of ways to counter that, but each of them have their own problems. I thought of introducing Cyberdexes into the Corpside, but again, that violates the design philosophy of having no silver bullets. I tried to swap it out with alternative R&D pressure cards such as Global Security Clearance and Spy Cam. The problem with that is these cards encourage uninteractive runner play. You sit back, you wait until an agenda pops off R&D, and then you run. That's not good. I also tried doing something very interesting, which is to make the Corp side more spiky, introducing lots of shocks into the Corp queue. If you can't balance the runner side, why not make the Corp side stronger? Give them some ambushes in R&D to make medium digs less attractive. When I tried it, people didn't draft the shocks, so it wasn't all that good. Apparently, dedicating one precious deck slot to a shock is not something most people want to do. So after lots of hemming and hewing, I finally decided to remove the mediums altogether in favor of other R&D digging cards. Turning Wheel, Maker's Eye, Indexing. Even though this means that I did violate one of the design philosophies of having less diverse cards, that means most of my R&D digging cards are Shaper cards and Turning Wheel. It's not diverse, but for the sake of balance, I decided to make that design choice. Another problem with runner dominance is that, as I said, Armitage is too good of a card. I can't really think of any other runner economy card that I would use as a starter card. Maybe Algo Trading? I did try to put Algo Trading in the cube, but it ended up being undrafted. It always was the last card that made its way around the draft, and no one ever wanted to play it. It really is horrible. Even though it was printed so recently, you'll be surprised at how bad Algo Trading is, even in a climate where there's no CTM, there's no breaking news. There's not much breaking news tagging. Algo trading is still disgustingly bad. Armitage is just a much better card. I could turn algo trading into a starter card for runner economy, but will that really solve problems? I'm not sure. In my conclusion was that I I guess I can cripple the economy on the runner side by reducing the number of good economy cards in the cube. There were some economy cards that were too high on the power curve, such as Lucky Find. It's too easy to get money from Lucky Find, so I swapped them out for more conditional econ cards like Cash. Gives you a bit of econ, but if you draft properly, if you have Aesop's, if you have Tech Writer, if you have Scheherazade, you'll get rewarded for drafting the Cash. It still doesn't solve the underlying problem though, that Armitage is just such a strong card. If you reduce the power level or the frequency of economy cards in the cube, people are just going to play the Armitages more often. So to solve this problem, we cannot look at the economy. We must attack the other pillar, which is what they use the economy for, breakers. If you can't nerf the economy, try nerfing the breakers. So what's wrong with the breakers? There are too many good breakers in the queue, even considering the fact that some people might be hate drafting. Typically, a lot of people will prioritize breakers. If you have a Corroder in your opening set, you almost always draft it. Corroder is so good. And I feel that conditionless breakers that allow you to break any ice of that subtype, are a bit too easy. Like Snowball. Snowball is not the most efficient fractor, but the fact that with enough money you can break any barrier refractor makes drafting a bit too linear in my opinion. Drafting should be more interesting in that you are forced to think of ways to make clunky breakers work. So two things I wanted to do is to reduce the number of linear breakers. So cards like Zoo, Snowball, I tried to reduce the number of them and favored breakers that are more conditional. Breakers such as Chameleon, which require some form of setup. You need some strength reduction cards, like NFR, the other fractor that you need to have some support for in order for it to reach its maximum potential. I also decided to ban platinum standard breakers. It's just like banning cards that are above the power curve, too far above the power curve, like Siphon and Temujin. Paperclip is too good. Lady is too good and basically cards that are on the most wanted list. They are there for a reason. Keep them off the queue. So I still have Lady in my draft. I still have Yonk in my draft, but the frequency is a lot lower. Corroder and Gordian Blade are cards that are in the core set, and those that set the gold standard. Anything above that should be reduced in frequency, if not banned altogether. So on the right, you see the original set of fractors in the Birmingham queue. After my iterations, these are my changes. I basically, as you see, I took out a lot of static breakers like, or rather linear breakers like Snowball, and I took out the gold platinum standard breakers, so Paperclip is gone. I replaced it with another copy of Corroder, and more situational breakers like Black Cat and NFR. I also have a breaker that probably will never see play, a very bottom tier breaker in the form of Ankusa. You'll notice that the breakers are ordered from top to bottom in terms of power level. Corroder and Lady are tier 1, and Inti is pretty bad. Ankusa is just horrible. Remember, it's 6 to install. I don't think anyone will see anyone installing Ankusa during my cube draft, but having it as an option is something. Alright, so besides trying to balance the runner corp win ratio, I also tried to spice up the runner draft. Again, the drafting process of the runner side being so linear, I wanted to make it more interesting. As I mentioned before, runners don't have a lot of win conditions, which is a problem. So instead of trying to give them more win conditions, one way I try to fix the problem is to give them more interesting breakers. As I mentioned, having NFR in the cube is quite interesting. It makes you try to come up with a minus strength strategy, for example. Another interesting idea for breakers is to introduce the Geist Breaker suite, the Cloud Breakers. Problem with that is that they need so much support. You need Link, you need Tech Traders, and you can't even draft Geist. It's an identity. Single use breakers are a big problem in draft because um you're not guaranteed access to levy, and you're easily locked out because it's a lot of corps are very much ice based. So I just didn't see any way I could incorporate the Geist Breaker suite into the cube draft, so that was scrapped. Chameleons, however, are a different story because they're not single use. They're just really inefficient because they cost extra clicks to install every single turn. So I'm trying to experiment with making it viable by giving it all the support it needs. I've all the LLDS processors in the cube. I have Shahrazad's, tech writers, and even a copy of AutoScripter. So hopefully someone will finally bite and try to use chameleons in their runner deck. Maybe, just maybe, that could be something. It would be quite interesting to actually build a chameleon deck in a cube draft, I must say. Very susceptible to hate. I'm not sure how strong it will be even if you get all the combo pieces though. So that is something I'm going to monitor in the next future iterations of my draft. Another important thing to note is that rush corps are very strong, and because of that, I'm going to introduce more inside job like run events. Inside job's a bit boring, admittedly. It's strong, and the corp feels quite helpless until they get a double ice remote. So I'm going to introduce cards such as Run Amok, Rig Results. Those are more interesting. Those do not guarantee successful penetration of the remote from the runner, and have more dynamic, interesting counterplay. So that's the important part. Less linear cards, more situational, conditional, but very interesting cards. Another thing I'm thinking of doing is to actually have an alternate win route. You still win off agenda points, but instead of winning from R&D deep digging or remote locking, why not introduce win conditions from HQ? So I'm gonna try introducing cards that force HQ ice because they are such strong HQ pressure cards. Fisk Investment Seminar is usually a bad card for the runner because it helps the corp draw more quickly into their money and their agendas, but if you can abuse it with HQ multi-access like Nerf Agent and HQ interface, you could make a very strong draft deck. Alternatively, Fear the Masses is going to be a card that I'm looking to include in the next iteration of my draft. For the first time, there will be a 6 per deck card in my draft. Now, Fear the Masses has the potential to be incredibly overpowering. If someone gets their hands on all 6 copies, they can very easily end up milling the runner. Imagine Fear the Masses for 6 mils, same old Fear the Masses for 6 mils, play another Fear the Masses from hand for 5 mils. That is insane. That would be an auto win turn. So we don't want that, especially considering that corps are not guaranteed Jackson Howard. So I'm going to try it out with 5 copies of Fear the Masses first, and we'll see how things go. 6 per deck cards are generally not encouraged in cubes because they reduce the diversity of cards in the cube. But I think that Fear the Masses can provide for some interesting drafting experiences. You have to try to hate draft someone, make sure they don't get all copies of Fear the Masses. We'll see how that turns out. That could be a very interesting thing. Or it could be a complete failure. Either way, there's only one way to try it out. Finally, another idea I have is to simply give Corps Jackson Howard. There have been lots of arguments, especially with rotation on the horizon, that Jackson Howard is required for the game. It is essentially a rules patch for the game, one that Netrunner desperately needs because the rules don't really have an avenue to help the Corp from agenda flood. A lot of Corp games were lost simply because the Corp found 3 agendas in their first few turns, and there's very little you can do as the Corp to salvage that sort of situation if you do not have Jackson Howard with you, and if you're not a rush deck. Another reason why rush decks are so strong, because they can push agendas out of circulation as quickly as possible. So Jackson Howard is an important rules patch. It is a very overpowered card, and overpowered cards shouldn't be in the queue. But for Netrunner to be fun, you need to give the Corp a chance when they are agenda flooded, and Jackson Howard does that. So I think for my next iteration, I will have everyone have 1 copy of Jackson Howard in their starter pack for them to use in their Corp decks. So those are just some ideas that I've been toying around with cube design. There are many ways you can push your cube towards. I've had people talking to me about how it will be interesting to have a cube with all the binder for the cards and see what people make of them. Ultimately, it's up to you. Cube design is very open-ended, and the gameplay experiences you get will really vary from person to person, from group to group, from cube to cube. Most important thing is to have fun playing it, drafting it, and for myself, designing it and seeing how things work out when I adjust certain cards in certain configurations. Hope you found my insights interesting, and sorry to the rest of you who are probably falling asleep at your desk right now, but this is the end of the video. Thanks again for watching and happy net running. Goodbye.